The Florida weave system for growing tomatoes is by far my favorite way to do it because it's so fast, easy, cheap, and efficient. So in today's video, we're gonna actually take you through the full life cycle from bare dirt to removing this Florida weave structure from start to finish. Today, we need to talk about how to actually install some TPost and do a Florida weave tomato trellis. So let's go ahead and get right into that. Before I hammer in this final TPost and talk about the Florida weave structure, let's go over why the TPost is such a great tool. This one here is an 8-foot T-post, which means that by the time I hammer it in, I'm going to have about 6 feet effective vertical height to support my tomatoes. The thing that's really great about T-posts is these little bumps here, because they act as natural locks for the string. So as the tomatoes start pushing down on the string, like you see behind me, it's going to want to slide down the post, but these little bumps stop it from doing that. The other thing that's great is that it has this little fin down here, and what that does is it makes it a very good anchor in the soil. So once it's hammered in, it's very unlikely to go A, pop out of the hole, or B, lean over too much. But we do have a trick to help counter that lean from the tomato weight, so I'm gonna show you that right now by hammering this post in. So a couple things to note when you're hammering your T-post in. The first one is that you want these bumps facing away from your tomato plants. The second thing you wanna do is make sure that to the best of your ability, it's in a relatively straight line with your tomato plants and with your other T-posts. This will help make your weave more organized, and I'm going to start by pushing it in lightly as much as I can to reduce the amount of hammering. So this might be a little bit scary, but just remember that as this sits in the ground over time, the ground is gonna get compacted, it's gonna get wet, and the T-post will rust a little bit, expand, and it's gonna lock into place. So it might seem a little bit scary at first that it's going in so easy, but it will firm itself up over time. The other thing you probably just noticed is that I didn't put this T-post in straight in. I put it out at a slant away from the plants. This is because as the plants grow heavy, they're gonna wanna pull this T-post in towards the plants. So by biasing it out a little bit, we're actually buying ourselves a lot of repair to the structure over time, because eventually this will end up being pretty close to vertical with all the weight of the tomatoes. An important note for installing a full Florida weave or basket weave trellis system is that you do want your 2 outer posts to be angled away, but every second or third tomato, you also need a vertical post. This vertical post is what stops the whole system from flopping over one way or another, and it adds a lot of rigidity to the system in general. It gives you an ability to tie up slack and tighten up the whole system overall. If you could get away with it, it's best if you do it every 2 plants. In this case, I have 5 plants in row, so I would 2 plants, post, 3 plants, post. But again, 2 or 3 plants, totally fine. You don't want to go any longer than that, because then you're going to start having a very floppy system, and you're probably going to think, wow, this system sucks, it's not working very well. You just need to make sure you have enough supports. So now we're at the critical point of tying up these tomatoes in the true basket or Florida weave. I wanted to quickly mention a couple different options. This is cotton butcher's twine. I'm testing it out this year. Right behind me, that's what's being used right now. But the normal standard is a poly twine or tomato twine. It's a nylon plastic sort of twine. I'm not crazy about it since it's plastic, but I wanted to try it to see if it holds up any better, to be significantly better than something like a natural material such as cotton. The one thing that I will say is that I have used jute or sisal twine in the past, and I found it to be so rough that it scratched up the tomatoes and increased the disease prevalence. So that's why I'm going for something soft like cotton and something less scratchy like this poly twine here. So let's get into actually how to tie these up right now. So to start our weave, what we're going to do first is actually go to the end of our T-post in between 2 of those bumps. I'm going to tie a double or triple knot. The only thing that matters about this knot is that whatever it is, you don't want it to slip. I'm already finding this poly twine to be pretty annoying because it's not really bound together. But let's go ahead and try it out. The idea behind the Florida or basket weave is that you're creating a basket around your tomatoes. So as I start here, tied off to the post, and I approach the first tomato, I have to either go in front of it or behind it. So I'm gonna go behind, and then when you get to the next tomato, you're gonna go in front. So what you're seeing already is that I'm starting to entrap them in alternating strokes. So this is behind, in front, behind. I'm gonna come around here, and I'm going to wrap it around the post, around the same height, and I wanna wrap it around 2 to 3 times. The reason why you're wrapping it is because you wanna pull some tension on this line here, And by overlapping the string, as you wrap around the post, the string is now locking onto itself. So that's the beauty of that center post. It helps tie up some of that slack. So now this tomato originally went behind, so I'm gonna go in front of it now. And this tomato is in front, so I'm gonna go behind. And you probably get the picture, this one was behind, so I'm going in front. Now as I approach the T-post, I wanna pull out some slack, get something to cut it with. And see here, I'm leaving it loose, but the other string is still tight because it's wrapped around that other post. Now as I pull this tight, all the tomatoes respond by standing more upright. So I'm gonna pull this tight. Once again, I'm gonna wrap it around the post 2 times, and then I'm going to tie the string to itself, like that return string that I just wrapped around. And I'm gonna do a double knot there. Yes, polytwine. The little ends are all frayed. And I could tell this works really well because it's holding onto itself, but it's a little bit annoying to deal with all these little frayed bits. Now the last thing I like to do is I take the original line that I tied off with and the line that I finished with, and I tie those two together. The idea behind this is that now the whole line can't slip because they're mated to each other at this knot. So this whole system has created a basket that the tomatoes are now sitting in. So if I push it one way or another, all the tomatoes are moving in unison, and that's why you want that center post. If you didn't have that center post and I had 5 tomatoes all in a line, this could get very floppy very fast. So now that you saw the setup for a single set of tomatoes, let's do the full run to show you exactly how that works. When you're doing a Florida weave system, you're gonna wanna do this tie up every 6 to 8 to 10 inches maybe. If you do it every foot, you can get away with that, but you're starting to get into dangerous territory there. Speaking from personal experience. And what happens is that you're gonna end up having too much tomato to support at once, and it's gonna get a little bit floppy on you. But the nice thing about the Florida weave system is that it's very forgiving in those circumstances, and you can still get away with it. After about a month of growth, I'll do an update about how to prune and support the whole structure as it continues to grow through the season. So stay tuned for that one in the future. Now let's do a full run of the tomato Florida weave. What you'll see is that I didn't go a very large step up because these tomatoes are so small that at this point they don't really need more than a single string. So I'm going to try to split the difference and get a little bit of height here so I could grab all those. But the basic principle is going to remain the same. So I'm tied off to the post between 2 bumps. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come behind this tomato, go in front of this tomato, hit my post, and actually I'm gonna try to cheat it and go a little bit higher there. So you'll see, once again, I have the slack. I wanna pull the slack and get as much tension in that line as I can. Then I'm gonna wrap it 3 times to make sure that string is locked onto itself. A lot of people complain about the Florida weave slipping tension over time, but if you wrap your string 2 to 3 times like this, it's not gonna happen. So keep that in mind. So now on that previous tomato, I went in front. So on this one, I'm gonna go behind. And on this one, I'm gonna go in front. And then on this one, I'll go behind. So keep in mind also when you hit a flower cluster that you don't put the string right up against the cluster unless you're okay with losing that cluster, because the string might break it since those flower cluster stems tend to be a little bit more fragile. So again, I wrapped it 3 times to lock the string. And now I'm gonna do the opposite. So in front, behind, and in front. Hit the post again, and we're gonna wrap it 3 times. If you're feeling confident, you can get away with just a double wrap, but especially at the beginning, when we're setting up this first establishing wrap, I like to make sure that I do the 3. So then come back again, go behind, and go in front. So here I have a flower cluster. I'm gonna try to be careful and get right underneath it. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it and give it 3 wraps. And now actually let me bring the camera in a little bit closer to show you how I tie off this final knot. And then this is the return line, the string that I just brought over. So I'm gonna take my end of the rope here and I'm gonna do a single overhand knot while trying to keep some tension. That's why I held on to that string. So you can see there's a single knot right here. We're gonna come back through and tie one more knot so that it's a double. Just like that. So now this is nice and tight. And the final bit of insurance that I like to do is I take the original piece of string and I tie it to that final return line. So let's go ahead and do that. This, like I mentioned, prevents the whole thing from slipping because they're now mated to each other. And it's effectively a single piece of string. It has nowhere to go. I'm gonna just keep tying knots because I'm feeling a little bit paranoid. There we go. So now I have 3 knots and this whole thing is entirely taut and now supporting these tomatoes. Let's do a quick pan and talk about the next steps. So here's the basket weave in action. You can see all the tomatoes are moving together. So now this whole field of tomatoes is fully supported, but as the season progresses, they'll start developing suckers, they'll start developing a lot of foliage, and we're going to talk about how to support all that and prune all of that in a future video. The only thing left for me to do here today is to actually add a bunch of straw mulch, just like I have back there, fully mulch this area out, give it one more water, and I don't think I actually need to water this for probably a month because of how wet the soil is deep down below, like I showed you guys. It's been about 2 weeks now since we put in these tomatoes and built this Florida weave trellis, and we've had a lot of growth in that time period. You can see all the tomatoes look really vibrant and healthy. They have this really nice green color to them. And actually this one even has a tomato, which I am leaving. I am of the belief that you leave the tomatoes to set. But what's interesting is that this tomato is shorter than all the rest. That's probably because it's trying to develop that fruit. But let's just get right into it. The first thing we're gonna do here is come in and tie our next weave. So this isn't going to be that high. It's not like a 6 to 8 inches, but this tomato here is a little shorter, so I wanna make sure I grab it at the same time. So just like before with the Florida weave, we're going to alternate. So that one is behind, this one is in front. We're not gonna worry about what we're grabbing on the tomato itself. We just wanna make sure that basically every single part of the tomato is captured by that twine. Go around the post, wrap it 3 times, and now we're gonna do the opposite of what we did before. So now once we tie up these tomatoes, the next thing we're gonna look at is how to prune and what sort of pruning I like to do on my Florida weave tomatoes. So we're down here on the ground with our tomatoes, and I wanted to talk about this one here because it has the most going on. So this is a Marbone. This is actually the fancy tomato that was $15 seed packet. But what I want to talk about is some of the pruning and structure development down here. What you'll see right away is that there's a pruner literally at the base of the soil right here. This is one that we're going to want to get rid of. It's already shooting off the trellis here, so it's not going to be easy to support, and it's so low to the ground that I don't really want it there. Anything that's touching the ground is going to be prone to pest and disease issues, so that's kind of priority number 1, is getting all of these leaves off of the ground. So I'm gonna just prune them and toss them up front here so you could see how much is actually coming off. And now the other thing is, when it comes to a Florida weave, you could actually support a lot of suckers. I personally don't remove that many suckers because I wanna get as many tomatoes as I can. So if you look down here, there's a sucker coming in right here. If I wanted to, I could actually force this one up in between those 2 trellis lines. And now it'll have some sort of support going up, and that's great. But honestly, anything on that bottom, literally the bottom foot, or even 8 to 10 inches of the plant, I don't want anything there. I wanna make sure that there's enough airflow down here and that I can visually see the ground, because it just makes it easier to keep a healthy tomato plant if you're up off the ground as much as possible. So I'm actually gonna come in, I'm gonna remove this sucker right here. I'm gonna remove these leaves because they're just now trailing on the floor, and the sucker up here. So you'll see I have, I don't know, maybe 10 inches or so of stem that has nothing on it. So now this fan leaf probably won't touch the ground, but eventually I will prune it. And this sucker is already in between 2 lines, so I'm going to leave it there and let it keep growing to fill out this section of the plant. So that's kind of the main thing you're looking for at this stage of growth. We'll check back in a few weeks or a month and see where we're at then. It's been 80 days since these tomatoes have been in the ground in this Florida weave setup. So let's talk a little bit about how they're growing, how they're doing, what worked, what didn't work, and what we need to do next. First thing to talk about is what the plants actually look like right now. So obviously I'm getting a ton of tomatoes, like every single plant is absolutely loaded up with tomatoes. So you might think, well, the plants don't look that good. Why are you still getting tomatoes? Well, this kind of stuff is just the natural dieback that happens as the tomatoes get old. I've just been honestly lazy about coming by and cleaning it out. A lot of this is natural dieback that just occurs when the tomato continues to grow, puts out new leaves, and then it needs more energy. So when it needs that extra energy, it'll actually just give up on some of the lower leaves and they'll just wilt back and die. Some of this could be a little bit of disease. There was some powdery mildew, but the fact that it hasn't spread up into the upper portions of my plant, as you could see, they actually look overall quite healthy, very green at least, and there doesn't seem to be any major disease issues. This plant is probably the worst of them all, but even on these beefsteaks, they have the same problem. You can see that the leaves start turning yellow and die back. It's not really a fertilizer issue, it's just a matter of the plant aging. So that's not really a big deal, but I am going to come through and clean out all of this to kind of refresh and give this plant new life. But let's talk a little bit about some of the actual true failures, and one of them is right behind me over here. All right, so this tomato right here is the major problem child. This is one of the ones I was actually the most excited about. It is the Brandywine cherry. Had very high hopes for it. So this is all that's left. No leaves. It basically, I don't know what the heck happened here. It seems like it just decided to entirely make tomatoes, and that's it. It just set a bunch of tomatoes. I'm like starting to wonder if it was a determinant. I'm pretty sure it wasn't, but this is the end result. It's a totally trashed tomato plant. I probably won't grow it again. Even the ones that did ripen early on just honestly didn't taste that good. So that's a failure. I'm not gonna replant anything there. I'm gonna just let this husky cherry fill in this whole panel. It's still producing a ton of very delicious tomatoes, so I'm not gonna slow it down. I don't wanna compete with it. I'm just gonna give it a little bit more breathing room. So there is one more major failure, and that is this black prim. It got so much disease, it just never did well. I think I got maybe 2 tomatoes off of it. So these ones have a little bit of blush and they might still ripen. I'll probably leave them on the counter. If not, I could eat them as green tomatoes, but you could just see that the plant's just not healthy. So rather than leave this here, I'm just not getting enough to justify the space, the water, and the amount of disease that it's now throwing onto the other plants. So I'm gonna go ahead and entirely remove this plant and these last couple tomatoes, but some of these tomatoes are growing a little bit outside the boundaries, so let's go wrangle some tomatoes. Once we get to this lifespan of the Florida weave, I no longer bother even trying to do the actual weave where I go between each separate tomato and weave a little pattern around it. I'm just doing a basket now. And what that means is that I'm coming around, I'm doing a single strap, no weaving around the actual plants, just simply a strap of twine to hold these tomato plants up. So you see this one was flopping. Now if I pull this in, it'll now be upright and it'll be properly supported. So that's all we're going to talk about in this update, but we'll check back in a few weeks and we'll see how this is going. Mid-September, and these tomatoes have now been in the ground for just about 5 months. And actually, they've existed now for 6. These were started back in March. You could see they're still standing. Overall, they look decent. They don't look perfect, like you could see here. There's a lot of dead leaves, foliage. I've talked a lot about that before. It's not really a huge deal. Now, what you will see is that there's barely any fruit left on these plants. Why is that? It's because September is here, which means that we just went through the hottest time of the year. At least in San Diego, actually September is the hottest. But we had 2 to 3 weeks of really, really rough temperatures where even the nighttime low was down to 70. So what does that mean? Well, if your nighttime temps are too high and the daytime temps are also too high, you're not gonna get any flowers set and you're definitely not gonna get any fruit set. But what we do have is actually some new tomatoes that are coming along nicely. This plant here has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 baby tomatoes on the way, and we still have enough sunlight hours that I could probably eke out a couple more beefsteak tomatoes. The cherries in the back are still prolific, and the plum tomatoes also cranking out tomatoes nonstop. So what do you do when you get to this point in the season and you're ready to move on to your fall and winter vegetables? You have a couple different options. If you're in a colder climate, you might want to consider topping your plants. So what does that mean? That means that you're going to come by, for example, this plant that has 5 or 6 tomatoes, what I'm going to do is come up to the top and prune off the lead of the plant. What this will do is it'll force the plant to focus its attention on ripening these leftover fruits rather than continuing to grow upwards towards the sky. This also helps contain it a little bit more because now you've been growing for so long that you're starting to outgrow your actual support. You can see the tomato back there is now at about 7 feet up off the ground. So really you have a few options here. If you want to continue, go ahead and top them, and this will help speed in the ripening as you get into late frost. But if you want to keep going, you can let them ride all the way out until they die. If you're in a temperate climate like I am in San Diego, you could just leave them in the ground and they'll continue producing, at least the cherry tomatoes. But anything like the beefsteaks, there's really no reason to keep them in the ground past September because they're not going to be producing fast enough to produce a nice, tasty fruit. So I'm going to be topping these guys right now so that I could get this last little harvest. And also I'm just ready to get into fall. I want to put cabbages here, broccoli, cauliflower, because that's what I'm craving now. I've been eating enough tomatoes and peppers to last me a lifetime, and now we're ready to move on. So we'll check back in a few more weeks when I'm actually ready to rip all these tomatoes out. But that's all you need to do. Top tomatoes if you want to get a little bit more. If you're done, go ahead and rip them out. If you're in a moderate climate, leave your cherries in the ground and you'll probably get some for another couple months. We're now at the start of October here in San Diego, and while the Florida weave itself is holding up great and supporting these tomatoes have definitely reached the end of their life cycle. You could really start to tell when your tomatoes start coming out all damaged. This one's covered in all these little yellow spots. That's usually due to stink bugs walking all over the tomato, piercing it with their proboscis and causing damage. The other thing I'm noticing is something is pecking or eating the tomatoes. So at this point in their life, they're ripening too slow that I can't really keep up with this damage to the point where it's worth it. It's now fall and these tomatoes have been alive for way too long, something like 6 months, maybe even a little bit more, and it's time for them to go. So if you're in a colder climate and let's say you're maybe a month away from frost, one of your options could be that if you still have some fruit ripening that you want to make sure you get, you could come by and top your tomato plants. What that means is that you come by, cut off all the growth tips of those plants, and that'll force it to actually finish ripening what fruit it has instead of focusing on growing upwards. But if you're like me and you're well past everything and you don't have any more tomatoes to get, then now is the perfect time to just go ahead and remove your plants. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my knife, I'm going to cut all these strings down, and I'm going to come in at the base and clip the tomato right at the soil. What this does is it preserves some of those roots in that soil to help feed the future plants that I put in here. Now, one thing I'll mention really quickly is that if you were thinking ahead of time and you used a twine that wasn't plastic like this, then you could just compost it directly. Say you have jute or cotton twine, you could take that whole mess of tomato plants and twine, throw that in your compost bin, it'll be just fine. But what I did is I actually just cut one side so that I could quickly just grab all those nylon ties and get them out of my way. So now they're not all tangled up with my plant matter and I don't have to sort them out afterwards. So at this point, it's really just about chopping, dropping, and removing these tomatoes. Now the only thing left to do is to chop, drop, and remove all these tomato plants. So let's go ahead and just start doing it. One of the hardest parts about actually removing your Florida weave is removing the T-posts that hold it all up. So one of the first things I like to do is kind of wiggle it around in every single direction that you can. This helps it kind of create a loose pocket of soil around it. The reason why these are so hard to remove and why they're also so good for using in this use case is that they actually will rust at the base, and that rust swells up and creates essentially an anchor in the soil. So that's what's going on there. It's basically impossible to rip out on your own, but what we could do is start digging up all around it a little bit. And one of the best ways of actually removing these is using leverage. So what I'm gonna do here, since a lot of people probably don't have a giant mattock or pickaxe at home, I'm gonna take my cinder block here next to that T-post and use this as a lever to try to pull this T-post out. There it is. As you can see, there's a ton of rust at the base, just like I said. All that rust is what really held it in place there. But I've got quite a few more to go here. But that's really all there is to a Florida weave. Very simple structure, very efficient structure, and it's guaranteed to give you a lot of tomatoes.